TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello and welcome to The Briefing, your afternoon fix of all the latest political news, debate and analysis. I'm Arlene Foster, and for the next hour I'll be joined by political commentator Joanne Nadler. Here's what's coming up over the next hour. We will talk with an enemy of the Kremlin on how Putin manages to hide his wealth across the globe. The Prime Minister faces intense pressure and will now face the Privileges Committee over whether he misled the House on lockdown parties. We'll be getting reaction to that. And as the siege of Mariupol continues, Ukrainian fighters maintain their resistance from their final holdout. We'll be getting an update on the situation in Mariupol from an urban warfare expert. So give me your political briefing, send in your views and opinions by emailing gbviews@gbnews.uk or tweet me at gbnews.
Good afternoon, it's 3 o'clock. I'm Rhiannon Jones in the GB newsroom. Boris Johnson says he's sure he'll still be Prime Minister later this year. That's despite fresh criticism from senior members of his own party. Speaking this morning, Mr Johnson added that the public wants the government to get on and focus on other issues. That, as Conservative MP Tobias Ellwood said, there's an absence of discipline, focus and leadership in Downing Street. Last night, MPs ordered an investigation into whether the Prime Minister misled Parliament over COVID breaches. Boris Johnson says a new partnership agreed with India will enable the country to strengthen its own defence industry. The Prime Minister is currently in New Delhi for talks with his Indian counterpart Narendra Modi. As part of the New Deal, Boris Johnson's pledged to support India's goal of building its own fighter jets to reduce expensive imports of military equipment. Mr Johnson said the two leaders had told negotiators working on a post-Brexit trade deal to get it done by Diwali in October.
Today, we've agreed a new and expanded defence and security partnership, a decades-long commitment that will not only forge tighter bonds between us, but support your goal, Narendra, of Make in India. We've agreed to work together to meet new threats across land, sea, air, space and cyber.
The United Nations is warning the number of civilians killed in Ukraine is going to be much higher as the horrors inflicted in areas of intense fighting come to light. The UN also said there's growing evidence of war crimes and said Russian troops have indiscriminately bombed populated areas, killing civilians and wrecking hospitals. Boris Johnson, meanwhile, has announced the British embassy in Ukraine's capital, Kyiv, will reopen next week. Earlier, the mayor of Mariupol appealed for a full evacuation of the besieged city after the Russian president claimed it's now controlled by his forces.
There are still 100,000 people in this city who, for the second day in a row, are waiting for evacuation. And they give us just such a tiny number of buses. Like it was yesterday, they said there would be 90 buses, but only 7 arrived.
The World Bank estimates the war in Ukraine has caused $60 billion worth of damage to buildings. David Malpass, the organisation's president, made the comments during a conference in the US. Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky also spoke at the conference. He said his country needs $7 billion a month to make up for the economic losses.
The funds from the war tax should be used to help Ukraine, to rebuild everything that Russia has destroyed in the war. And if this tax is applied to other aggressors, the funds should be directed to the victims of the war. Every country in the world needs to prepare now for the possible complete severance of relations with Russia. No one should depend on the political whims of the leaders of that country.
A German national linked to the disappearance of Madeleine McCann has been identified as a formal suspect by Portuguese authorities. In 2020, German police said they were investigating a man known as Christian Bruckner in connection with the case. The 3-year-old disappeared during a family holiday in Praia de Luz in 2007. In France, Emmanuel Macron and Marine Le Pen are out on their last day of campaigning ahead of the presidential vote on Sunday. Opinion polls show President Macron is about 10 points ahead of the far-right leader, but his re-election is by no means a done deal. Surveys are predicting a voter turnout of roughly 73%, which would be the lowest since 1969. And UK retail sales dropped last month as the rising cost of living starts to hit consumer spending. According to the Office for National Statistics, they fell by an unexpected 1.4% in March. Online sales bore the brunt as people cut down on unnecessary purchases, dropping 7.9%. Fuel sales also fell as people reduced their non-essential travel amid soaring petrol and diesel prices. This is GB News. We'll bring you more as it happens. Now, though, it's back to the briefing with Arlene Foster.
Welcome back to the briefing. Well, tomorrow marks 2 months since Putin launched his campaign of terror against the sovereign state of Ukraine. Arguably, the Russian President, Vladimir Putin, has never been more in the international spotlight, with the West imposing crippling sanctions on the Kremlin and Russian oligarchs. Many people are asking what is the state of Vladimir Putin's wealth as sanctions start to bite. Well, joining me now is someone who has been labelled as Vladimir Putin's nemesis-in-chief, Bill Browder. He's the author of a new book, Freezing Order, a true story of Russian money laundering, and I'm delighted to have him on the show this afternoon. Bill, I want to get to the book in a few minutes, but first of all, perhaps for the benefit of our viewers and listeners, tell us how you became involved in Russia after the fall of the Iron Curtain.
I set up an investment fund in 1996 in Moscow called the Hermitage Fund. It grew to become the largest investment fund in the country. I then discovered that all the companies that I was investing in were being robbed blind by the oligarchs. And so I started to protest publicly by identifying who was doing the stealing, and then putting it in the Financial Times, the Wall Street Journal, and so on. That obviously upset a lot of people. I was expelled from the country. I was declared a threat to national security. My offices in Moscow were raided. And my lawyer, a young man named Sergei Magnitsky, who investigated the office raids, was then arrested, tortured, and killed in November of 2009. And since then, I've made it my life's work to go after the people who killed him and those who profited from the crime and the crimes that he discovered. And that has led to the Magnitsky Act being passed in a number of countries around the world, here in the UK and the US, et cetera, which freezes the assets of the people who killed him and the people who do similar types of abuses. We've also traced the money from the Putin regime, and that's what my new book is about. And that we've also learned a lot about how Vladimir Putin stores his money in the West.
So Putin has been a huge figure now for many, many years, and thank you for giving me that background and the viewers and listeners the background of how you became involved in Russia. But he's been around for a long time, and I think for our viewers and listeners, sometimes it's difficult to understand the financial implications of sanctions. So that's why I wanted to get you on today, Bill. No one better to explain why economic sanctions are so important to try and deal with Putin at this particular time.
Well, so we have a war going on where he's killing, indiscriminately killing Ukrainian civilians in the tens of thousands, and we want to stop this war. How do we stop this war? Well, we can supply weapons to Ukraine, as we're doing, but we can also make sure that Vladimir Putin doesn't have the money to carry on doing the war. It's an expensive war. It costs him $1 billion a day. And that's what sanctions are all about at this point, is stopping the flow of money. So we say, well, where is his money? Some of the money is held at the Central Bank of Russia, and the West has frozen about 60% of that money. It was 640 billion. We've frozen 60% of that money. Some of the money is Vladimir Putin's own money, and I should point out that Vladimir Putin came into power right around year 2000, so he's been around for 22 years, and in that 22 years, he has stolen an absolutely ungodly amount of money. And if we look at the total theft from Russia since he's been in power of him and the oligarchs that surround him and the cronies, et cetera, it's about $1 trillion. $1,000 billion, $1 trillion has been stolen from the Russian people. And that money is being held offshore, mostly in the hands of Russian oligarchs. And that money is potentially money that Putin can use to wage this war. And as we're trying to cut off his money, that's the money that needs to be frozen and sanctioned.
And I think for our viewers and listeners, it's very important to hear that, because obviously when we think of countries going to war, we think about the Ministry of Defence, we think about the Treasury, we think about the money that's held in government. But what you're saying is actually Putin has used his time in office to cipher off money for his own personal wealth, and he uses oligarchs as a way of hiding that money in plain sight.
Exactly. So, you know, Vladimir Putin is the richest man in the world, but Vladimir Putin can't keep any of that money in his own name, because if he did that and anybody had a bank statement or a property register that showed that he was a rich man, they could wave that around and discredit him. And he's in the business of blackmailing people all his life, and he understands how powerful that message could be if someone had that information. And so he doesn't want to be blackmailed himself. So if he can't hold it in his own name, he then has to find people whose names he can hold it in. And those people are the Russian oligarchs. And so when you see a Russian oligarch who's on the Forbes rich list and it says that they're worth $20 billion, that's not how much the oligarch is worth. The oligarch is worth 10, and the other 10 belongs to Vladimir Putin. And so when we're talking about cutting off Putin's money, we have to say, let's cut off the oligarch's money. And that's what this whole story is all about.
Well, it is an incredible story for those of us who live in democracies to try and get our head around the fact that this is happening in the modern world today. But of course, your book deals with all of those issues. It also deals with, and I think it's important to give the full title of the book, it's Freezing Order, a true story of Russian money laundering, state-sponsored murder and surviving Vladimir Putin's wrath. It covers all of those issues, Bill, and it's out now, isn't it?
It covers all of those issues, and I think the third part of the subtitle, "Surviving Vladimir Putin's Wrath," is really the sort of the extraordinary thing. I've been fighting with him, man to man for 12 years. He hates my guts, and I'm not just saying that. He's called me out on a number of occasions. They've threatened me with murder. The general prosecutor of Russia publicly declared that Bill Browder shouldn't sleep peacefully at night. They've tried using Interpol 8 times to have me arrested, chasing me all over the world, hiring agents to surveil me, follow me, etc., arrest warrants, extradition requests. And it's really a remarkable thing that I'm actually here talking to you today, because these people are very bad people. So I've seen Vladimir Putin up close and personal. I've been screaming from the rooftops for the last 10 years that he's a criminal that needs to be contained, not engaged with. Unfortunately, nobody really listened. And here we are today, after all this appeasement and apologism for Putin, it's given him really the green light to go and do this unbelievably horrific terrorist attack on Ukraine, where every day the Ukrainians are experiencing the equivalent of September 11th for what the United States experienced. It's just heartbreaking beyond belief.
Well, let me say, Bill, we're very glad that you're still here and are able to publish this book, and it is my hope that the Russian people get to read this book, because I suppose that's your hope as well, that actually people in Russia, the scales from their eyes would fall away and they would see actually what their great leader is doing to them.
You're absolutely right. And as you can imagine, there was no Russian publishing company that would publish my book. So we have translated the book into Russian, and we are going to be offering it for free online imminently, so that any Russian who wants to download it can download it for free so they can read this story, because anybody who reads this story will understand that that Vladimir Putin's regime is not a normal regime. It's a criminal regime. It's a state-run mafia. And people, when I said that in the past, people said, Bill, you've got some kind of emotional issues here. Keep that to yourself. But it's now a matter of fact that this man is a serial killer. He's a major international fraudster, and the only way we can deal with him is as a criminal, and no other way.
A huge thank you for coming on this afternoon, and I hope we'll be able to talk again soon, and all the best with the book. I hope it's a huge success. Thank you.
Thank you.
So let's bring in my studio guest for today, Joanne Nadler. Joanne, that was quite an interview there.
It's really fascinating.
Yeah.
What a brave guy
Absolutely.
Bill Browder is, and how we should all be incredibly grateful to him for the work that he's done, and for being a whistleblower, and for, as he said, continuing to argue his case when people were very dismissive of it. And presumably when, frankly, he was ruffling the feathers of a lot of Westerners who were making money through this system as well, not just, embarrassing the Russian regime.
Yeah, and I mean, he's very upfront. He went to Russia to make money.
Yeah.
And then when he was there, he could see what was going on and then started to blow the whistle, as you say, and to call it out. And an incredibly brave man, I have to say. But it's been another tough week for another man that you and I both know as well in Westminster. It's been a tough week for the Prime Minister, with not just the usual suspects calling for his resignation. I'm thinking of Steve Baker, for example, coming out and calling for his resignation. What did you make of that?
Well, it's significant for the reasons that you've said, that actually, well, for two reasons, really. One, that he is not, as you might say, the usual suspects, although he has been critical of the Prime Minister. And he's been very critical of a lot of the things that happened during lockdown. So I think what's admirable about Steve Baker is he has largely focused on the issues and rather than the personality of the Prime Minister. And therefore, I think his criticisms are, come with a particular sting to them. But also, he did his own U-turn effectively this week, Steve Baker, in that he initially argued that we should perhaps give the Prime Minister the benefit of the doubt and take seriously his sincere apology. But then, as the various events of the week unfolded, he decided eventually that that was unsustainable.
And then people like Tobias Ellwood, who have already called for the Prime Minister to go and put in their letters and what have you, has said that there is likely to be a leadership challenge now. Do you think that's the case as well?
Well, I mean, what he said is he thinks is a question of not if, but when. And it's a very, very strange situation that the Conservative Party now finds itself in, because the Labour Party have been quite effective, I think, this week in terms of parliamentary machinations. But whether that'll play to their advantage in the longer term, I'm not sure, because it's very evident that they are only sort of performing half the job of an opposition. So they've been effective in forcing this thing to the embarrassing conclusion that Boris Johnson will have to face this committee hearing, and that the rest of us are going to have to face even more months of hearing about what is now, it seems, increasingly feels like a very kind of well, not a very unimportant issue, but in the overall scale of things, something that I just think most of us feel should have been concluded weeks ago.
Sure.
But to a certain extent, that now knocks it even further into the long grass. And so would there be an immediate momentum to go for a leadership election? I think not. I mean, things have been put off until after May 5th, until after the local elections. No doubt the Conservatives will do pretty badly in those local elections. But it's also important that the Labour Party is seen to do very well. And I think, that remains an open question, frankly.
Yeah. Well, we're going to be talking to a pollster later on about those very elections. But coming up next on the briefing, we'll get reaction on the latest in Westminster from a Liberal Democrat Member of Parliament. But before that, there's a short break.
Hello there, welcome to a weather update from the Met Office. I'm Claire Nazir. Now, into the weekend, a few showers still lurking around. We are chasing cloud, but there will be some sunshine and also a brisk wind. pretty much sets the scene for the next few days and into the early part of next week. And the reason why we're stuck in a pattern with low pressure across Iberia, high pressure extends across Iceland. And you can see here lots of isobars on that chart, bringing in that cool breeze from a cool North Sea. The winds will be gusty over the higher ground. But a pleasant evening for many on Friday evening. Some sunshine to end the day, still a gusty wind, and an overnight that cloud rolls in yet again from the North Sea, certainly for the eastern side of England, southeast Scotland, and the far north of Scotland, seeing that low and misty cloud. And 1 or 2 showers lurking around, but most places will have a dry night. Temperatures holding up as well because of that wind. So through Saturday morning, we watch as the cloud slowly breaks up towards the west. But where it's thick enough, particularly Pennine districts, Midlands, seeing a little bit of showery rain through the morning into the afternoon. The low clouds across the far north will burn back to the coast. Brightest skies, Northern Ireland, Western Scotland, the West Country seeing some fine conditions as well. But if you catch that wind, it's going to feel cold, particularly on this east coast. So here, temperatures typically around 14, 15 degrees Celsius. Further west, we'll see a 16 to 18 Celsius. Now, through Saturday evening and overnight, we watch as some showers towards the near continent migrate towards the southeast of England and then push further west. So you may see a little bit of wet weather as we enter Sunday. But Sunday will be fair for most. Some sunshine, still that nagging wind, more cloud on Monday, a few showers towards the south. But the key feature of the weather over the next few days will be it will turn cooler. Certainly you'll feel the difference through the beginning of next week. Bye-bye.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events, and I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debate, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewberry, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
On radio, they call it the drive time slot, 4 p.m. until 6 p.m. as listeners head home. It's that part of the schedule when the dust of the day's events begin to clarify, and we try to make sense of it for you. Brazier is drive time for radio and TV. It's fast, it's punchy, it's opinionated, there's a Brazier angle and a little bit of levity.
That's the question. That's 2 questions, actually.
That's Brazier, Monday to Thursday, 4 till 6 on GB News.
Hello, I'm Patrick Christie's.
And I'm Mercy Moroki.
Make sure that you join us Monday to Thursday, 10 a.m. until midday, right here on GB News for To The Point.
We're not afraid to talk about the topics that matter to you or the big topics that always matter.
We cover absolutely everything, from the breaking political stories of the day to law and order, what's going on in the channel. We're not afraid to hold people to account.
We always make sure we include your views on our show.
Indeed, if you're thinking it, you can guarantee that we're saying it. So make sure you join the conversation with us, 10 a.m. until midday, Monday to Thursday for To The Point on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Where would you like to go?
Just take me to the studio, please, Matt. You know where you're going. I've got a show to do. Friday Night Feast on GB News, 7 p.m. And it's like nothing you've ever seen before. We take a different angle on the week's biggest news stories. The viewers and listeners set me some absolutely mad challenges to do. We tried to rehome a rescue dog. And yes, there's some other wacky stuff in there as well. I feel like I could take on the world. Well, that's that. Friday Night Feast with me, Patrick Christie's, every Friday, 7 till 9 p.m. on GB News. Be there.
Every night at 11 on GB News, we bring you the next day's stories the day before. It's basically like time travel.
If it's a big story, we'll cover it, guaranteed. But we'll also have some fun along the way.
Big opinions, big laughs. Sometimes big hair.
This is
Headliners, the paper review show that won't send you to sleep like the others will.
11 p.m, 7 nights a week. Join us.
Welcome back to the show. Well, it's been a very busy week in Westminster as MPs returned from 2 weeks of recess. The Home Secretary, Priti Patel, faced MPs for the first time since she unveiled the Rwanda migrant plan, which has faced very heavy backlash from across the political aisle. And the Prime Minister was welcomed back to the political arena with an investigation being launched into whether he misled Parliament over his account of rule-breaking events in Number 10. Let's bring in the Liberal Democrat MP for Edinburgh West, Christine Jardine. Christine, thank you so much for coming on this afternoon.
You're welcome.
I wanted to touch on, first of all, the Prime Minister's woes, and Parliament have now referred it to a parliamentary committee. Perhaps you could tell our viewers and listeners what that means and how that works from now on.
Well, how it works from now on, I mean, the Prime Minister could have been set in this, for him, a very difficult and dangerous path, because it will now go to it will be investigated, it will go to the Standards Committee, and they will decide whether or not the Prime Minister has breached parliamentary standards, whether Parliament was misled. And they can then recommend, as you'll know yourself, they can then recommend whether or not he is suspended. And viewers will remember from what happened with Owen Paterson, that would then go to Parliament for a decision in the House about whether or not that suspension should go ahead. So the Prime Minister now is on a path where the stakes could be very high if there are more fines, or if he is found to have misled Parliament when he said that there were no parties and that no rules were broken. And it could ultimately, hypothetically, it could lead to the Prime Minister being suspended. Now, we're in uncharted territory here, because the Prime Minister has never before been in a situation where they've been accused of breaking the law and investigated by Parliament. So, but the stakes are very, very high now for Boris Johnson.
This has been an investigation led by his peers, if I can put it like that, because there are 6 members of the committee, as I understand it, and 1 chairman, but the chairman has recused himself because he has made commentary around this issue. So it's those 6 that will decide on, first of all, the innocence or guilt, and then on the proposed penalty, presumably, as well, Christine, is that right?
Yep, and as you know, if he were to be suspended for, say, 14 days, that could lead to a by-election in his constituency if he's suspended for a period of time. And that would be unprecedented. So, people will be watching this saying, oh, well, that's an outrageous suggestion, or that's the most, the most far-fetched outcome. But it's not actually, because that's exactly what the Standards Committee is there to do, is to judge whether or not you have breached parliamentary protocol, you've broken the rules, you've misled Parliament, and whether or not you need to be there needs to be some punishment for that. And it can be quite severe, as we saw with Owen Paterson, who had to step down, and there was a by-election in North Shropshire, which the Conservatives lost and the Liberal Democrats won. So, this is an astonishing situation into which Parliament has been taken by a Prime Minister who is felt by many in the House of Commons to have shown, including myself, shown not just a lack of respect, but contempt, both for the people of the country and for Parliament, where, its representatives sit.
And, obviously it has been referred to the Privileges Committee now, Christine, and do you have any empathy or sympathy for the suggestion which has been made that it's gone now to that committee, it should be left there, and meanwhile we should get on dealing with the big issues at play at the moment, which of course are the cost of living crisis, the energy crisis, what's happening in Ukraine, and focus on those issues as opposed to continually talking about Partygate?
Well, my view has always been that those issues are the most important thing that we face at the moment. But the problem has been that in order to address it properly, in order for the public to have faith and confidence in its representatives, then they have to, and that we're dealing with it properly, then they have to have confidence in the people in those positions. And unfortunately, I don't think it's been possible. And from what I hear on the doors, I don't think it's been possible for people to have that faith in this Prime Minister now. I completely agree. It is now with the Standards Committee. The Standards Committee will investigate and they will judge. And it is up to them to decide what is the appropriate course of action. But I don't think it is possible for the country to have faith in this government while it is led by someone over whom there are such questions at the moment. And I think that is the issue.
Yeah, indeed. And of course, due process has to be followed. And I'm sure you would agree with that in terms of the committee. So it's important that that happens. Well, thank you, Christine, for joining me this afternoon. I'm going to get Joanne's thoughts on that interview. No surprise that the Lib Dems are keeping the pressure on, Joanne.
Well, absolutely, because as far as Parliament's concerned, they're very much a minority grouping. And this gives them an opportunity because the media is the mainstream media is so very well obsessed with all of these elements of procedure that I think, of course you can't blame the Liberal Democrats or indeed Labour for trying to use any tools they can. But I think some people will see this particular inquiry as being A, very technocratic and B, very politically motivated. And I do wonder whether it won't necessarily help the opposition parties as much as they may feel it may do.
And there's been a lot of commentary, particularly on social media, from some of the Prime Minister's opponents. And the ever-reliable Andrew Adonis, for example, has told us that the fall of Boris Johnson will be the beginning of de-Brexit, which is a new word for some of our viewers and listeners. But de-Brexit, of course, means that we would reverse out of Brexit.
Well, brilliant. Lord Adonis, please bring it on. The more he says that kind of thing, the more I'm sure that Number 10 will be rubbing their hands together with glee.
But there is an element of that, is there not, in some of what's going on?
Oh, undoubtedly there is. That's why it's good that people like Lord Adonis can't help bringing it out into the open, because they want to sort of celebrate that fact. However, I think what they completely misunderstand is that the minute they do that, they bring the forces of support back around Boris Johnson.
Yeah.
Boris Johnson doesn't really exist in the normal political framework. No. He's an emblem, I think. People project onto him where they're coming from politically, and therefore he becomes this kind of cipher for all sorts of other issues politically. It's not really about Boris Johnson.
Yeah. Yeah, and just finally, I was thinking, and actually I saw this referenced as well on social media, that plotting while the Prime Minister is out of the country is not really a good look, and people are brought back to when Margaret Thatcher was in Brussels and people were plotting against her. Do you remember that leadership election challenge? And I mean, plotting when the Prime Minister is out trying to do international trade deals, speaking to Modi about war in Ukraine, and meanwhile some of his backbenchers are circling the wagons.
Yeah, and I do question the narrative. I've heard some commentators this week saying, how badly Boris Johnson came out of his exchange with the other broadcasters, another broadcaster called Sky News. They did an interview with him. He looked very uncomfortable. But I'm not sure that the broadcaster came out of it looking particularly well either.
Absolutely. I think that's probably right. We're going to move on now, and it's time to get the news from Rhiannon.
Thank you, Arlene. It's 3:32. I'm Rhiannon Jones in the GB newsroom. Boris Johnson says he's sure he'll still be Prime Minister later this year. That's despite criticism from senior members of his own party. Speaking this morning, Mr Johnson said the public want the government to get on and focus on other issues. That, as Conservative MP Tobias Ellwood said, there's an absence of discipline, focus and leadership in Downing Street. Last night, MPs ordered an investigation into whether the Prime Minister misled Parliament over COVID breaches. Boris Johnson says a new partnership agreed with India will enable the country to strengthen its own defence industry. The Prime Minister's been in New Delhi for talks with his Indian counterpart, Narendra Modi. As part of the New Deal, Mr Johnson's pledged to support India's goal of building its own fighter jets. He said the two leaders had told negotiators working on a post-Brexit trade deal to get it done by Diwali in October. The United Nations is warning the number of civilians killed in Ukraine is going to be much higher as the horrors inflicted in areas of intense fighting come to light. The organisation added there's growing evidence of war crimes and said Russian troops have indiscriminately bombed populated areas, killing civilians and wrecking hospitals. This as Boris Johnson announced the British embassy in Ukraine's capital, Kyiv, will reopen next week. A German national linked to the disappearance of Madeleine McCann has been identified as a formal suspect by Portuguese authorities. In 2020, German police said they were investigating a man known as Christian Bruckner in connection with the case. The 3-year-old disappeared during a family holiday in Praia da Luz in 2007. TV online and DAB Plus radio, this is GB News. It's back to the briefing with Arlene Foster in just a moment. Don't go anywhere.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events and I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debates, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewberry, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
On radio, they call it the drive time slot, 4 p.m. until 6 p.m. as listeners head home. It's that part of the schedule when the dust of the day's events begin to clarify, and we try to make sense of it for you. Brazier is drive time for radio and TV. It's fast, it's punchy, it's opinionated, there's a Brazier angle and a little bit of levity.
That's the question. That's 2 questions, actually.
That's Brazier, Monday to Thursday, 4 till 6 on GB News.
Hello, I'm Patrick Christie's.
And I'm Mercy Moroki.
Make sure that you join us Monday to Thursday, 10 a.m. until midday, right here on GB News for To The Point.
We're not afraid to talk about the topics that matter to you or the big topics that always matter.
We cover absolutely everything, from the breaking political stories of the day to law and order, what's going on in the channel. We're not afraid to hold people to account.
We always make sure we include your views on our show.
Indeed, if you're thinking it, you can guarantee that we're saying it. So make sure you join the conversation with us, 10 a.m. until midday, Monday to Thursday for To The Point on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Welcome back to the briefing. It's just coming up on 15:37. A convicted child abuser referred to by authorities as Christian B has been declared an official suspect by Portuguese prosecutors investigating the disappearance of Madeleine McCann. Prosecutors in Faro, Portugal, have said German authorities had made the move at their request, but did not give the suspect's name. Well, joining me now is Jim Gamble. He's a former senior police officer who assisted in the original investigation. Jim, thank you so much for joining me this afternoon. What do you make of this latest move, Jim? It's obviously a step forward, but interestingly, it doesn't mean that this guy is charged. It just means that he is now an official suspect.
Well, that's the key, and I think you've got to look at the 2 factors around that. It's a significant step. One of the issues is that the clock was ticking, and as you'll know with your background in law, the Portuguese legal framework works to a statute of limitations. Almost unbelievably, that's a 15-year period for even crimes as serious as this. So next week, the 3rd of May, we'll see that 15 years complete, and thereby there was a possibility that they wouldn't have been able to pursue anyone after that date. By naming him as an official suspect and designating him a Guido, they are able to bypass that. And a lot of people are saying, well, is that why they have done it? I think the second issue is the more important one, and that is that I don't think that's why they've done it. I think it's because they have been continuing their investigation. The German police and the German prosecutor have continued theirs. They've shared the information they have, and there is a strong, substantial, circumstantial case against this individual. Of course, they're innocent until proven guilty, but I believe they can put him in proximity to the location the offence took place, and that they can also demonstrate through his own criminal profile that he's exactly the type of character in that place who may have opportunistically taken advantage of a situation.
And Jim, it's very important that we explain to our viewers and listeners the difference in Portuguese law and our own laws here in the UK, because I was really struck by the fact that this week, actually, there was a prosecution and conviction of someone who had murdered a child, Ricky Neve, killed back in 1994, and he was only found guilty just this week. So it's important that we draw out the differences in Portuguese law to the UK law.
Absolutely. I mean, the one other thing I would say is UK law, you cannot escape a murder. It wouldn't matter whether it's 20 or 30 years later that we capture DNA evidence that allows us to hold you to account for that. But the law in Portugal, of course, applies to that territory. One of the reasons I don't think it was necessarily just a cynical ploy to continue to bypass that and to extend the time is because the Germans could prosecute him at any time. So I think if the person is guilty, that's for the court to decide. But in order to administer that process, the Germans could quite easily do that by themselves. So there's a number of conflicting issues there. What evidence do the German authorities have that they've shared with the Portuguese? And how, when you put that together with what they have, undoubtedly, alongside what the Metropolitan Police will have collected over the years, what is the missing piece of the jigsaw that makes them now, after all this time, be convinced that this person, who's been on their files since 2011, has a case to answer?
And Jim, you were involved in the original investigation as the senior child protection officer for the UK at the time. 3-year-old Madeleine McCann, she disappeared in May of 2007, as we've indicated. She would be coming 18 years of age. That's, for me, quite hard to believe, but in some ways not hard to believe because of the passage of time. Do you think that this is something that will bring closure if this man is charged for the family, which has been an incredible journey for them? My goodness, the ups and downs they have faced.
Well, it's been a nightmare for them. I think, the investigation was, I'm on the record as saying I think the investigation was badly handled from the outset. They lost the golden hours, with the forensic opportunities that came with that. They didn't concentrate on clearing the ground beneath their feet, i.e. looking at the parents and making judgments based on evidence about whether they should be investigated, which should be your first line of inquiry. And their collection, collation and analysis of information and evidence from different parts left a lot to be desired. So, I would say, having been involved in this for the period of time I have, there's no evidence I've seen that would ever implicate Kate and Jerry. There's the myth and the legend and the rumour around DNA, fundamentally, inaccurate. The issues around the car and the dog indicating in a car that wasn't used by the McCanns until 6 weeks after Madeleine had gone missing. So they've been through the nightmare of being under the microscope and within the focus of people's attention who suspected them to have been involved. And of course, they've had to bring up Sean and Amelie over all these years, carrying the heartache that parents of a missing child do. So this could be everything, but Arlene, it could also be nothing. We've been here with false dawns before. But the key to me on this is the circumstantial case. We know between 1995 and 2007, he was living on and off in Praia da Luz. We know that in 2005, he raped an older woman in that vicinity. We know that from the court documents that we've seen that he was involved in burglaries of hotel rooms and apartments. And we know from the cell site analysis that a phone attributed to him places that phone, and we hypothesize him, in direct proximity to the apartment at the time the offence took place. And there's more. So I think he is a really strong potential suspect. But the proof of the pudding will be: do the Portuguese now follow up by applying to extradite him from Germany to Portugal to answer whatever additional questions they have.
Well, we'll be watching to see what happens before the 3rd of May. Jim, thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. Well, as we've been talking about it earlier, the Prime Minister is continuing to face intense pressure following his COVID fine. And yesterday, MPs approved the Privileges Committee launching an inquiry into whether the Prime Minister misled the House. Well, it is yet more trouble for the Prime Minister. And, of course, the local elections are just 2 weeks away. What is the public mood? Joining me now is Adam Drummond, who's from Opinium. I hope I've said that right, Adam. And Adam, you're going to give us an update on what's happening in the polls at this present moment in time.
Yeah, so what's interesting is what's changed and what hasn't changed, really. So Boris Johnson's ratings basically fell off a cliff around about Christmas or thereabouts. And in January, it was really particularly bad. You had not only most of the public saying that he should resign, but actually a plurality of 2019 Tory voters saying that he should resign. It was very close, but more Tory voters from 2019 saying he should resign than stay. Since then, with the Ukraine crisis, he's seen a bit of a rally among Conservative voters, but there's evidence that that's sort of wearing off and maybe quite sort of temporary. So a decent number of Conservative voters in 2019 expect and want the Prime Minister to resign before the next election, even if they think at the moment he's the best person to be handling the Ukraine situation.
Announcement about Rwanda as a mechanism for dealing with illegal migrants. How has that gone down in the polls, or is it too soon to tell?
It's very mixed, because what we've seen in some polling questions is not actually describing it in correct detail. From what we've been able to do so far, it seems like it's fairly mixed in terms of the response, whether it's positive or negative. There is some evidence that even those who are sympathetic to the idea and like it question whether it's a good use of money or not. And I think if you are from the sort of pro-immigration side, or if you're Labour trying to attack this, really the angle to go down is how much it costs rather than the principle of it, because the principle of offshoring processing of immigration claims isn't that unpopular. It's more the practicality of it.
And of course, the local elections in England, Scotland and Wales aren't the only elections that are happening. In Northern Ireland, we have assembly elections. Have you any polling for that at the moment, Adam?
We don't, but from what I've seen, it's looking like it could potentially be a quite surprising and good night for Sinn Féin from what's publicly available.
Yeah, well, we'll see what happens there, because the polls, as everywhere, bounce around in terms of the Northern Ireland situation. But can I just ask you then, finally, in relation to the other big election that's coming up at the weekend, the French election. Again, that seems to be one where Macron is well ahead. But what is your poll saying about that?
But again, so we haven't done anything in France, but from what the French pollsters have come out with, and they have a fairly good record in terms of French presidential elections, you would expect Emmanuel Macron to win, but it is certainly closer than he would have liked, and I think lots of people would have expected. The one historical precedent that we have is that Macron himself outperformed his polls in the first round. I think they were expecting him to get about 25%, and he got 28%. And a similar thing happened in the second round in 2017, where, again, he outperformed what polls were expecting him to get in the second round against Marine Le Pen. Obviously, what's happened in the past isn't the best guide always to what's going to happen in the future. At the moment, the consensus seems to be Macron winning by about sort of 10 points. But again, that's far, far closer than the sort of 30 or so points that he won by in 2017. So even though Marine Le Pen looks like she's on course to lose, it would still be by some margin the best performance by the French far right in any national election.
Adam, thanks so much for joining us this afternoon. I'm now going to go back to Joanne. So there's a lot of elections coming up at the moment. The first one, of course, is the French election on Sunday. That's an interesting battle that's going on there at the moment, isn't it?
It's so interesting because in many ways we're seeing replicated now in many countries, really, the sort of issues that we discussed here in the lead up to Brexit, the sort of cultural issues about whether or not you're somebody who feels that you want to cleave to your own sort of traditional view of your nation state, your culture, or whether you're more comfortable sort of on the globalist stage, a sort of an international focus. And I think those kind of issues are very much crystallised in the two candidates in France. Of course, you can't transfer everything across from the Brexit situation. France has its own peculiarities, if you like, but fascinating from that point of view, yes.
Yeah, and then the local elections are coming up again too. I mean, I've seen various predictions as to how many seats the Tories are going to lose in that, but there's undoubtedly going to be a reduction, isn't there?
Oh yes, I mean there would be, even if the party wasn't going through the kind of eruptions that it is nationally. I think at this point in a government, you would expect, at this point in the lifestyle of government, you'd expect local government seats to be lost, which is why when we discussed it earlier, I also think, the stress in analysing the results afterwards must also be on how well have Labour done, not only how badly have the Conservatives done. And of course, in a way, the Conservatives will be briefing now to expect bad results. And it's interesting that we haven't heard a great deal from Labour on where they think they may be next week.
It'll be an interesting take, and just 2 weeks' time, this time 2 weeks, we'll be covering the local government elections and indeed, as I've already said, the Northern Ireland Assembly election as well. But now we're going to go back to Ukraine, because as the war in Ukraine is set to pass 2 months, one of the key battlegrounds is the port city of Mariupol. The battle for control of the city is reaching its culmination, with a number of Ukrainian soldiers now holed up and making a last stand at a steel plant in the south of the city. The conflict in Ukraine has increasingly turned urban as Russia seeks to seize and maintain control of cities. I'm now joined by John Spencer. John is a world-renowned expert on urban warfare. And John, you will have been watching very closely what has been happening in Mariupol over this past number of days. Give us your analysis of what's been going on.
So up till now, what we've seen is just a complete destruction of the city. I mean, it's a city of over 450,000 it was, and the Russians destroyed basically 100% every building in the city and has made it almost unlivable. But you have what's, the last stand that has been going on for multiple weeks of, around 1,000 soldiers, believed about 500 wounded, and then lots and lots of civilians trapped in the steel factory. Well, Russia made a decision, supposedly. One, I trust what Russia does, not what it says, but they're not going to try to overtake that final last stand of Ukrainian forces. To me, that's a sign of a loss, because if you have a living, breathing Ukrainian fighter still resisting in Mariupol, I don't think Russia can claim it's theirs, and it forces Russian forces to stay there to basically hold that, even if they're going to, if I believe the statement that they're going to blockade that steel factory and not enter the tunnels, because that is a nightmare for any militaries to enter the tunnel complexes that are below that factory, which create great refuge for the defenders and the civilians that should be let out. Just to be clear, there's been international calls for a humanitarian corridor, and Russia still is not letting a full corridor be established.
And we learned, I think it was a couple of weeks ago, that there's a new commander of the Russian forces, General Dvornikov, I think is how you pronounce it, and he led the intervention in Syria, where he basically bombarded Aleppo. Are we seeing him now taking control in the eastern region, the Donbass region, and similarly completely flattening urban areas? Is that his sort of strategy?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, he has the nickname as the Butcher of Syria. He was highly awarded for his actions in Syria, and we all watched the complete humanitarian destructions that was done to Aleppo and other cities in Syria. I do think that you'll see more of that use of just indiscriminate war crime bombings of cities, like we've already seen in Kramatorsk. I mean, the list of Russian war crimes, and I think the UN High Security person today said that Russia basically has no regard for any international humanitarian law and is executing this in more like terrorists than a nation state. But I think, with him in charge, I think we're going to see, unfortunately, a lot more destruction than we've already seen, which has just been horrific.
To ask you before I let you go, and I could talk all afternoon about this, to be fair, but we're running out of time, unfortunately, about the missile tests that took place just yesterday. What's the significance, or not yesterday, Wednesday, what's the significance of those tests, those nuclear tests happening?
I personally think there's very little significance of it. I mean, I think even the timing was just the United States and others have been tracking that test for a long time. It just, it's more posturing. I think maybe a signal to somebody. I don't even know if it's that far. It was something that was planned, and I think we're making more out of it than possible. It's the technology is really not where he thinks Putin wants people to think it is. And I trust the United States and the UK intelligence analysis of the significance. So I personally don't think it gives that much credence to potential escalations or anything like that. I mean, Putin's in chaos, to be clear. His government's in chaos.
Yeah. John, thank you so much for joining me. I hope to be chatting to you again very soon, because I have no doubt that this is going to go on, unfortunately, for quite some time. Thanks, John. Thanks for coming on. So, Joanne, just to finish off there, I mean, in the Times this morning, I was reading a piece that was saying that Western officials are saying two things. First of all, that Putin may still win. And secondly, that this is going to last to the end of the year. I think we're all now in that position, aren't we, that we think it is going to last for a long time?
Well, I think military experts have been saying that for some time now, that this, unfortunately, is going to be a very grim war of attrition.
Yeah.
And the two things are connected, essentially, it seems to me, this argument that Putin might still win, although what that win actually, what form that takes, we don't know. And we very much hope that that's not going to be the case. But it depends really on the capacity, I think, of the West to continue arming and supporting militarily, intelligence-wise, in every way that it can, Ukraine, against some of these issues that we don't seem to be able to have got a proper control over, such as the oil sales and the we were talking earlier, weren't we, in the programme about sanctions, but when you've got this huge discrepancy between the amount of money that we're limiting towards Russia in terms of sanctions, yet on the other hand, they're still able to make billions from oil sales. And even when those oil sales decline in value in terms of the amount of them, for instance, that they're selling to India, where the Prime Minister has been this week, it's a big problem.
Joanne, thank you so much for joining me this afternoon. You've been watching The Briefing with me, Arlene Foster. The show's back every Friday from 3 p.m. Up next, it's Nana.
Hello there. Welcome to a weather update from the Met Office. I'm Claire Nazir. Now, into the weekend, a few showers still lurking around. We are chasing cloud, but there will be some sunshine and also a brisk wind. Pretty much sets the scene for the next few days and into the early part of next week. And the reason why we're stuck in a pattern with low pressure across Iberia, high pressure extends across Iceland. And you can see here lots of isobars on that chart, bringing in that cool breeze from a cool North Sea. The winds will be gusty over the higher ground. But a pleasant evening for many on Friday evening. Some sunshine to end the day, still a gusty wind, and an overnight that cloud rolls in yet again from the North Sea, certainly for the eastern side of England, southeast Scotland, and the far north of Scotland, seeing that that low and misty cloud. And one or two showers lurking around, but most places will have a dry night. Temperatures holding up as well because of that wind. So through Saturday morning, we watch as the cloud slowly breaks up towards the west. But where it's thick enough, particularly Pennine districts, Midlands, seeing a little bit of showery rain through the morning into the afternoon. The low clouds across the far north will burn back to the coast. Brighter skies, Northern Ireland, Western Scotland, the West Country seeing some fine conditions as well. But if you catch that wind, it's going to feel cold, particularly on this east coast. So here, temperatures typically around 14, 15 degrees Celsius. Further west, we'll see a 16 to 18 Celsius. Now, through Saturday evening and overnight, we watch as some showers towards the near continent migrate towards the southeast of England and then push further west. So you may see a little bit of wet weather as we enter Sunday. But Sunday will be fair for most. Some sunshine, still that nagging wind, more cloud on Monday, a few showers towards the south. But the key feature of the weather over the next